Thank you very much. What a pleasure and an honor. So you have on my right, the better half here. I've got all kinds of goodies in my CV, but the big cheese in this pair is Davinder Sikand. And I'd like to, if I can, because the Wildlife Foundation is most definitely a husband and wife team. He and I have been married for many, many, many years. We have two children now studying in America, and I would like him to I'd like him to talk about the Wildlife Foundation. We have some slides prepared because he's the director and vice chair. I'd like to make some note that amongst us today would be the chairman, which is Mr. Ed Loosely. We begin in 2000. Tanjali, can we start with our slides on the Wildlife Foundation? And I would like to focus our attention to Davinder Sikand. He is an MBA. He's in private equity. I don't know. Maybe he does a lot of stuff too. I mean, many. But we'll get back to me later. Let this guy come in. Davinder Sikand.
Thank you, Joan, and hello, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there, and thank you so much for allowing us to take a few moments of your time to share some of the common issues and challenges that we may face across our respective environments. I'm of Indian origin, and we moved to Kenya. Our family moved to Kenya probably 3-4 generations ago, at the beginning of the last century, the end of the 1900s. And so we sort of Kenyanized, but both, my father certainly comes from Kenya. My mother was born here, and she brought him over here. It was a condition of marriage, I guess.
So we're glad to come home.
So our daughter, who's now a lawyer in the US, took us back to India a few years ago. She, after finishing high school, she went and did a year's internship in India, and she started reuniting us with our family there. And so over a couple of years while she was in and out of India, before she went to law school, we went to India 3-4 times, and each time we went into different, in my view, wildlife habitat areas where there's a lot of community involvement as well. We went up into Ladakh, we went to Spiti, we went to different parts of the country, Bodh Gaya. And what I found remarkable is that the issues that seem to face the people on the ground who live in close proximity to the wildlife were very similar to the issues that we face here. You have your snow leopards coming through the villages in the dead of winter and taking away goats, or the farmers are grazing their sheep up on the hills, and a cat takes them. And then there's the issue of, is there compensation, is there not compensation? And in many ways, the Indian government is fairly proactive. I believe there was, at least at that time, a compensation scheme. I guess, but there was certainly retaliation measures, and I believe a number of the villages told us that they wouldn't stand for a cat taking their livestock. And the same happens here, that the lions, the leopards, the hyenas will go in and predation and attack either in the homesteads, we call them bomas, either in the homesteads or out while they're grazing, take something, and the retaliation can be pretty severe. So we lose a fair number of cats. So we started to think through how can we better understand and really share some of the learnings and insights that we have here and that you have in your part of the world, and to manage for betterment. For at the end of the day, the people who live with the wildlife, certainly in Kenya, 70% of the wildlife live outside of protected areas. So the government has game reserves and national parks, and 30% of the wildlife are actually found within the national parks and reserves. 70% are outside on private land. So what we at the Wildlife Foundation have done, have chosen to focus on an area outside of Nairobi National Park, which is a protected area that is largely community owned, where the wildlife move in and out. Even to this day, the lions of Nairobi Park move in and out. Most of the animals move in and out. The rhinos less so, but everything else moves in and out pretty much. And it's pretty remarkable in today's age, with all the development and traffic, that this sort of coexistence, harmonious coexistence of wildlife still exists. So Joan and I are involved throughout East Africa. I am setting up a conservation fund. I'm a private equity manager, so on the side I'm backing a team to set up a conservation fund. We're called Okavango. We are involved in numerous ecosystems and different groups. The Wildlife Foundation being one of them, that focuses on the Nairobi and the Athi Kapiti wildlife area. But in different groups, we focus in different parts of the country and different ecosystems. So we have a pretty rounded view of certainly East Africa, of what the issues and challenges and opportunities are and may be. So with that,
You want to do the slides?
you go ahead. You do the slides, and I'll just chip in.
Should we start with the slides, Gitanjali? We have a presentation.
And I think feel free to ask questions as we go along. I mean, you run it the way you want, but
Mr. Sikand, I think we will keep it towards the end. Otherwise, we haven't given the option of muting in between. We will keep it to the end. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfect.
Yes. Thanks. Just to keep the flow going.
Yeah.
So back to me. Okay, so this is the wildlife protection, the Wildlife Foundation. The Wildlife Foundation begins in 2000. Let's go back to the first because I want to do a little backdrop. I'm not ready to. Hey, Gitanjali, where are we? Let's start at the beginning, please. Are we? Yeah, protecting. Let's just stay here for a little while, and I'll, as I talk, maybe we can. I'll mention, as you suggested, Gitanjali. I'll prompt you with next. Okay, so protecting wildlife dispersal areas for over 2 decades. My chair is here, so I'm kind of nervous. I hope I get my facts right. So we do begin in 2000, and what starts is that this guy Edward Loosley, who's amongst us today, he was coming off of a 2-year contract with the United Nations Environmental Program. UNEP is headquartered here in Nairobi, and it's become a self-perpetuating bureaucracy without a question and without a doubt. But 2000, 20 years ago, there was still some hope, and Ed was a glimmer of hope. And he could see you could urgently see that we were going to lose Nairobi National Park. Which in 2000 was still quite a vast open ecosystem without some intervention. So initially, the first organization, the first structure that comes into play is Friends of Nairobi National Park in 1995, which is a members organization. Ed loosely sees that it's not going to work. A members organization is just 2 weeks, so he begins a proper NGO, which is the Wildlife Foundation. And he begins that with a grant from the Nature Conservancy. He registers us, and we begin. And we begin by dipping into our pockets. The point is that in 2000, the idea of community payment for environmental services was completely unheard of, because what happens in conservation in East Africa, it's noblesse oblige. What happens in the history of East Africa is that those British, and when they get there, we own it, And so conservation begins with the British. And in 1995, when the first institutions are beginning to congregate or to emerge for conservation, it's generally what we call the Mzungus, or the white Europeans, and who appoint themselves, as it were, as custodians of the wildlife. Because in fact, they set up really nice parks we'll see later. And by 1995, we have Friends of Nairobi National Park. By 2000, we begin the Wildlife Foundation, because the encroachment onto the wildlife is is starting to emerge. One of the things I'll be talking about later, if I do have the opportunity, is my involvement with the American Chamber of Commerce. One of the one of the worst events to happen to our particular ecosystem is the export processing zone, which was a function of Clinton era of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, as we know. I mean, the whole point with Kenya is this emergence into the modern economy and how it's creating absolute devastation to wildlife and wildlife issues. So let's keep moving. So protecting what for over 2 decades. So for 20 years, we begin the Wildlife Foundation. The center, which we're going to see, only begins in 2018. I'd like to point that in 2000, it begins the Wildlife Foundation with Davinder and myself. We begin the arduous first steps of payment for environmental services. And again, what I want to point out is the transition from, a couple of white guys telling, dictating what's going on in wildlife in East Africa, now to community, grassroots-based conservation practices, which is really critical, because the very fact of it is that you've got to put the hands of conservation in your local communities. And anyway, and we'll continue it. Oh, and our first meetings are under a tree, and that kind of thing. I mean, and we keep trying. And so what happens in 10, a lot, do you want to say something?
I just want to add a few words.
Yes, sir.
So very, very, very quickly, because how long do we have?
2:30. We're okay.
You don't have time. Yeah. So the Wildlife Foundation, when it started, we secured a grant, and the grant was from the Global Environmental Facility, and it was about $1 million. And they said, go out and see if by making these payments for ecosystem services, these payments for keeping your land open, whether people will actually keep their land open. We ended up with close to 300 family groups, which if you understand the communities here, when you have a single family group, maybe 10, 15 people, and close to 60,000 acres on the edge of Nairobi Park, that was being protected under the lease scheme. Then what happened is that was only a fixed amount of money, and it lasted 10 or so years. And when the money ran out, the lease payments stopped, and people began to start selling their land again. It was quite successful in keeping land open and preventing people stopping people from selling. We'd enter into lease payments with the individual families, and most families by and large honored those lease agreements. When it ended, we said, this thing of going out and asking for donations is becoming increasingly difficult. Let's try and see how we can earn the money as a foundation ourselves to ensure that we keep the lease payments going, to ensure that we keep the bursary programs going, and whatever other community engagement activities we had. So the center, you can see it there. The picture is on the edge of Nairobi Park. That had been used and developed actually by an American university group that left the country after a terrorist attack several years ago. And it has been lying rotting on the edge of the park. So our Joan here, says, why don't we take that over and rehabilitate it and start to use it for income generation, so that we can then make the lease payments and start the protection again of the land. At the end of the day, it's about habitat. We all say wildlife, but for us here, and I think certainly in India as well, the real issue is the habitat, and we need to keep the open spaces, the habitat, where both people, livestock, wildlife can all commingle and coexist. So with this center, we took it over, rehabilitated it, and we started it as a place where kids could come and experience.
Let's continue.
Keep going.
You want to keep going?
Yeah, keep going.
Can we continue on the slide, Anjali?
Next,
please.
In the meantime, children would come over and spend anything from a day trip to up to a week and experience community wildlife issues.
Oh, here we go. Wait, we're not there yet. That's in the next slide. Okay, so here we go. The Wildlife Foundation was established in 2000, dedicated to conserving Kenya wildlife dispersal areas. Conservation programs include community, the conservancies, which incentivize local communities to share land with wildlife, conflict mitigation to prevent and manage human-wildlife conflict. My husband has referred to that, community rangers who track wildlife diversity, density, and movement. A little bit more background. So what happens in 1963 is that Kenya gets independence from the British. And what happened, the population of Kenya at that point is 7 million. The point, and where the Wildlife Foundation comes in is that we become an advocate for indigenous cultures and communities to protect their land. Because what's going on is that, I'll tell you the truth of it. My son's going to Harvard. And he's going to Harvard to learn about the Maasai's in Kenya. Because and the Maasai's are like, they're like having their, because the point is the Maasai coexistence with habitat, is world famous, and it should be because it's coexistence with wildlife. So at the time of 1963, you still have these nomadic people running all over East Africa. Then you get the protected areas, and then you get community ranches, and then you get subdivision, and then you get private title. So do you see where we're going? So what happens with the Wildlife Foundation? You've got to incentivize, you've got to subsidize indigenous cultures, because the point is that in 1975, now in post-independent modern Kenya, everybody's coming in to study, how you've got to save the indigenous cultures, because the sub-Saharan African terrain is so fragile. As you keep fragmenting the soil, you what's the word for it? You destroy it. It becomes infertile.
Let me give you a factoid. Conservancies today,
Yes.
I had mentioned earlier that 75% of the wildlife live outside the protected areas, so there's the government parks and reserves. Today, the conservancies, which are typically on community land, many of them are now fully managed by the local communities. Others are still being managed by the communities with assistance from NGOs like the Wildlife Foundation. But there's more land under conservancy today than there is protected land. So communities have adopted it and beginning to take the ownership for the wildlife that is on their land. And the government has followed up with an act which gives those communities some ownership privileges for that wildlife. And
Not consumptive use, is it?
Right now we don't have consumptive
What do you mean
use.
privileges? What do you mean ownership?
You own it because you get a seat on the board of KWS,
Oh,
Kenya Wildlife Service, as communities where you have a say in the government entity that runs it. But it's coming along, and communities are protecting their assets, and that's the only way it will survive, because if the people who live with the wildlife want to protect it, it will survive. If not, it won't.
And not to forget, the financial model for the conservancies is yet to be created. What we're doing here in the Wildlife Foundation, we're making it up as we go along. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we've got a lot to cover. Gitanjali, could we have the next slide, please? And then maybe we just keep moving it down. Okay, and here we have the TWF Center. So this was established, we have it in 2000. No, actually it was established in 2018. And we do this, then people come and we generate income, host activities to educate general public on community-based conservation, game citizen science, generate funds to run the LEASE program, Innovation Hub, the Line Lights, I don't know, that's something, a specialized program for us, host the Kapiti Regional Secretariat, the LEASE program. So we have, so TWF begins on a LEASE program because, as my chairman often points out, it begins in 2000, where the local Maasai were really concerned about marginalization and dislocation of their land and their traditional ways. So what happens is that we engage with them in a lease program where we pay them a paltry sum of money to keep their lands open. We haven't reflected that sum to inflation since we began in 2000, yet we've developed a strong relationship. And again, So the whole lease program has now morphed into the Community Conservancy. Our particular conservancy is the Narratinoy Community Conservancy. Can we have the next slide, please? Next slide. Okay, now here is a map so that we can see a map showing the location. Oh, wait, no, what happened to our map? Guided walking safaris. So
Yeah, go back to the map.
let's go back. Davinder, do you want to say something about the map?
So at the top in the green, you see Nairobi National Park. Just below it on the southeast side, you have what is called an orange triangle, Narratinoy. So that's our conservancy. And the center is kind of right there in the on the edge of the green. It's along the river. That boundary with the park is a river, and that whole southern boundary is open. The northern and the so kind of the boundaries around the top is all fenced. This bottom boundary is open today. And as the Wildlife Foundation, what one of the activities that one of the things we do is we have rangers that have been trained at the Government Training Center for Rangers. And the rangers right now cover this whole area, which is we call Triangle 1, which is I guess from Kona Baridi down to Isinya and then back up to Athi River. So that whole area inside there is currently being protected by the rangers that are employed by the Wildlife Foundation. And you can see that's Triangle 1, there's Triangle 3 and Triangle 2. That is all open right now. And the wildlife move in and out. And if you go down this way, you get to Masai Mara. And if you come up this way, there's Amboseli, which is very famous for its elephants. Mara is very famous for its lions and migrations. So this area in between the Athi Kapiti Plains is actually the connection between the Mara and Amboseli on the other side. And actually, if you follow Amboseli, you get into Savo, and you can actually go to the coast. So the whole thing is and can be kept open right now with the right incentives for communities so that wildlife can move back and forth. And the communities, this community, the Maasai, love their cattle and they want to keep their traditional lifestyles along with the modernization. So we call them digital Maasai nowadays. And working with them to keep their land open so that they maintain their pastoralist habits. And what some of what we're looking at is unlocking carbon, this whole climate issues that are going on nowadays, and the use of satellites we're working on to measure and monitor carbon. And what we found is that the areas where there is managed grazing by the communities have the highest carbon capture and content in the soil. So it becomes very critical to work with the communities so that you don't overgraze in certain areas and you allow the wildlife and the cattle to graze completely. But that's the whole area. And one of the things that we're doing post-COVID, where we lost all the school kids, we started ranger training sessions. So now at the center, we host rangers to come in and be trained. And they're coming in right now from all over Athi Kapiti. And as we grow, we'll spread it out to all over the country, and just so that people can come and learn properly how to manage their wildlife and security aspects as well.
I'd like to argue with my husband because I am a lawyer, and I would like to say it's really not as open as we would like to think. There are a lot of challenges to this ecosystem. Let's stay on this map for a while. Thank you. Some of the challenges, so Nairobi National Park, we see on the map now, you don't see this on the map, but Jomo Kenyatta International Airport is just there, about 20 minutes north of Athi River. And many tourists that come into Nairobi often see the passengers disembarking from the airplanes will see a giraffe or two coming out on their left. And it's really fantastic to be greeted into Kenya with your first sighting from the long flight with a giraffe. In 2000, alongside the Wildlife Foundation, we begin the big fight testing EMCA, the Environmental Management Coordination Act, and the Jerry Bora Housing Project, which is situated itself right there in the scene. In 2000, we began the Wildlife Foundation. Yes, indeed, this entire map was free and open. But in the 21 years that we've been in operation with the Wildlife Foundation, where the challenges every year become more and more and more severe, is because infrastructure development, land use shifts have all increased exponentially, not even by degrees, like boom, it's like an atomic bomb of like infrastructure roads. You've got this big, fat, massive recarpeting road from Athi River to Namanga. You've got a major road crossing the Kitengela horizontally into Rangai. You've got fencing everywhere, which captures and decimates the wildlife. You see giraffes caught in the weave of fences. And the issue and the point which I'm trying to make, as I was telling to Sanjay earlier today, is the fact that the government of Kenya, through judiciary, through administration, through Kenya, fails to enforce its rights under law. You know, a lot of the laws that are that have exploded in now modern Kenya say, you know, the Kenya Wildlife Service and the National Environment Management Authority, the two agencies with the loci standi to enforce the laws of Kenya in terms of environmental protection, they fail. They fail consistently, and they are silent, which means that recurring investment continues in illegal projects. And what's going on throughout this map there where the wildlife used to be is some really seriously failed development projects. One of them is PZ at Athi River, a complete failure of a development project, and they're just it's been completely ruined by development project, shopping malls, you name it. The Jimmy Bora, we lost on that. The project went ahead. It's now completely defunct. It's in a state of 202.
So Joan mentioned
Yeah.
there are certainly challenges. As with any nation, as it develops, there will be challenges. Our population has grown from independence at 7 million people to today 50 million. So those are the challenges that we face. Development is happening everywhere, and there's always illegal development, there's legal development. But the reality is, as of a few months ago, we had elephants coming in from the Mara. A family of elephants came into Naratanui. As of a couple of weeks ago, we had wild dog coming in from down here in Triangle 3. I don't know if you can see my finger, up into the Naratanui. This area down here in this game ranching, this area is probably the highest density cheetah population on the planet. We had cheetahs coming in even a few weeks ago into the Nairobi Park here. So the crossings are still open. Things are still open. It's a challenge. It's a battle, and that's why we're there.
That's why we're there. A little bit more observations.
Let's go to the next one.
A little bit more points in demographics of the country. So we have a very young population. Remember, we've gone from 7 million to 50 million in less than a generation. And the point is that the young Kenyan, well, how will they approach conservation? Because the very fact of it is, lifestyles are very, very difficult. They are very educated, and will they themselves adopt pro-conservation lifestyles? Although the opportunities in conservation as a sector is really being led not by Mr. Kavanaugh, but by the local community. We're walking safari. Can we move a little, because we really do. I want to get into more material if we can. Now explore the narrative here. Okay. One more down. Can we keep going on our slides?
I think the essential one on this one,
yeah.
At the center, we offer a product that's very unique. Most people come to the country and they get in their cars, they get into national parks, they get driven around. Here we offer the kids, it was kids when we started.
Or visitors.
Or visitors now, even a lot of adults come. Post-COVID, we've had to change. It's an experienced nature on the ground. Just go out on foot, work with the local communities, and it's a very different experience from what was traditionally offered.
Can we go next? Yeah. Next. Oh, there we go. Scan. Okay, this is some of the things we've done at the center. Can we take the next slide, please?
So this is wildlife territory. It is a ranger with a rifle. There could be anything here. Lions.
Scat is poo-poo. Okay, next slide, please. Lion Lights. Well, this is great. Our chairman is here. He's a Lion Lights champion, guest set up innovators. Davinder, can you explain how the Lion Lights work?
In fact, this is innovation coming from within our community. A couple of kids were trying to figure out a solution on how to prevent the lions from getting into the homesteads at night. And they started playing with bicycle lights using little solar panels. And they came up with a solar powered lighting system that flashes. And the lights flash. And the flashing lights seem to deter predators. Certainly lions and hyenas from coming into the homestead. So the incidence of nighttime predation has just plummeted. So now the predation is mostly during the day when cattle are grazing out, particularly next to the river. And if the kids who are watching the cattle, their attention is elsewhere, they can lose a goat or a cow quite quickly.
But the point is that human wildlife conflict is so accelerating because the density population within the area of the Adhikapiti plains and the Narrachinoy Conservancy, it is becoming more and more populated. So what was once pastoralism has now become homesteads, and they're setting up much more permanent lifestyles. So what happens is that they still retain their traditional lifestyles of goat and sheep and that the livestock, and what happens is a huge amount of predation because the cats are still there. So for decades and decades, one of the projects of the Wildlife Foundation had been to address human wildlife conflict through consolation payment, which was driving us crazy because, to pay against it was enormous. Lion Lights has proven extremely effective in 100% drop of predation. The lions hate these lights. We put up these lights that are nominal at cost, and these fantastic lights have proven a very effective deterrent to predation against livestock. And it's win-win. It's just win-win all the way.
And the Wildlife Foundation partners with WWF on the Lion Lights, and together with WWF over the last 5 years, I think we've probably set up 400 or 500 homesteads across where we are, Kajiado County, out into the Mara and across different parts of Kenya. So it is being accepted by larger organizations and communities across the country.
I think our chairman, who's in our audience, has just gone down to Amboseli. Amboseli has just seen privatization of the group ranches. Hello. What that means? It's, the stakeholders have gone from 5 or 6 to now 400. Lion Lights will be hopefully hopefully be used in Amboseli, and our effort is of course not to reconnect. Can we get the next slide, please? So here is the treachery of predation and the loss of livelihoods and livestock to the community. We can see how horrific and heart-rendering and emotional this is. Hopefully the Wildlife Foundation with our Lion Lights has addressed this, and we can gain community support to continue the Narrachinoy Conservancy and expand it because they can feel less risk to predation, because they know the Wildlife Foundation is there behind them, and we will support them in conflict. Can we get to the next slide, please? Installing Lion Lights, it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's a project the visitors, the kids used to do, help set up the different homesteads with Lion Lights.
Can we, next slide, please? And then litter pickup, school building. All right, and these are different activities.
Lots of different activities. We do removal of alien species, ecosystem rehabilitation. This is a lot working with the local kids. The kids built a football pitch recently and had games with students, with local students, barefooted with kids from overseas.
There was a football match with the kids from the UK versus the local kids, and the local kids had bare feet, and the UK kids had the UK kids lost. Can we have the next slide, please? Erecting the proposed building the local soccer pitch. Next slide, please. Yes. Next slide, please. Gabions, again.
Yeah, so this river here overflows a lot during the rains, and it was creating a lot of damage to the banks. You just getting wider and wider each year, and trees were coming down. So these kids helped to try and prevent some of that damage.
Next slide, please. And then we partner with KWS on a variety of projects to improve Kenya Wildlife Service, which is the government of Kenya parastatal, to manage wildlife on behalf of the government, on behalf of the people of Kenya as custodians, that the laws of Kenya mandate that wildlife is a national consignment of the people. The people own the wildlife, and KWS is mandated to manage it. Projects to improve Nairobi National Park, and the picnic site maintenance was one of them. But the Wildlife Foundation partners with Kenya Wildlife Service on many different fronts outside of activities at the center. The Community Rangers is one such platform that we work with Kenya Wildlife Service. And what else do we do? Wildlife Service. So much. We do lots.
The game count.
The game count census, and we're going to talk about the game count census. Can we get to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Here we go. Kids at the park bench. Next slide, please. Working with kids. This is within the park. Can we, next slide, please? I want to hopefully we can discuss the wildlife numbers. Expansion programs, partner with the Athikapiti Wildlife Conservancy Association, very important group. The conservancy movement in Kenya is really moving very quickly, which is great because private title is also moving quickly. Existing and potential wildlife corridors within the ecosystem, engage stakeholders, rangers, and activities geared towards keeping. I don't know if I want to read this because I want to get to the laws of Kenya.
Let me quickly go. One of our members at TWF was appointed to a government task force to help assess whether these corridors that I showed you on that map actually exist today and whether they're still open and how best to keep them open. And that's so they did a study that just ended a couple of weeks ago. The task force was presented to the minister and the president, and we're waiting for that to go public now. And they've recommended a number of initiatives to keep the crossing points open. And one thing we're getting now is a lot of carnage on the roads. As Joan mentioned, all the roads that are being paved and come up, there's a lot of death of wildlife on these roads. So part of the issue is to have the right crossings across roads and make sure that we reduce some of that senseless killing that happens.
Can we get to the
next? But there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Next slide, please. The game count we do, but my husband and I have been dedicated game counters. The game count was begun by Kenya Wildlife Service at least 2 decades ago. It was bi-monthly, and you would count the numbers of game within Nairobi National Park, which was stunning. The numbers of the eland, one game count we saw within Nairobi National Park, more than 300 buffalo, and invariably still cheetah, still leopard, many lions, and they need a lot of land. They need a lot of open giraffe, dozens and dozens and dozens. So you can see wildebeest have well.
Okay, but anyway, yes, I think the point of the game count is if you remember the map that I had gone over a little earlier. The green at the top here is Nairobi Park, and Nairobi Park does bi-monthly game counts, so 6 times a year, but they only count the wildlife in the park. And last year, during the height of COVID, the government suddenly comes up with a plan where they want to fence the entire park, and the community was very much against it. And so what we initiated at that time was a count outside the park in the triangle. If you remember that first triangle that I showed you, covering that whole first triangle, which is the main feeder from the park, and then from first triangle it goes into either left to the Mara or right to Amboseli. And so we then at the same time, same date, we simultaneously initiated a citizens count, in the area adjacent to the park in Triangle 1. And these are the figures that you're seeing for some of those counts. And just to demonstrate that actually there's a lot of wildlife outside, and that you just don't fence because you want a fence, you cut it off, and it just enabled the debate. And that it was these counts and this noise that the community were making that then caused the government to set up the task force,
and retract the ruinous management plan.
It's not retracted, Jenny. It's the fight is still on. So we're still fighting. That fight always happens, and but at least we have data now, and we have an engaged community that is very active on the ground.
Next slide, please. Spencer, didn't we? No, we didn't. Let's continue. Okay, overview of the large. So let's take a broader zoom here. Nairobi National Park is just a brief overview of Kenya protected areas: Nairobi National Park, Lakes District, Masai Mara, Amboseli, Laikipia, Tsavo, Coastal. So Nairobi National Park is vastly under threat through many reasons: subdivision, fencing, infrastructure, you name it. It's a tough one to protect. The Lakes District are under extreme threat. The flamingos of Lake Nakuru have all but disappeared. Masai Mara is also going through the same problem of fencing and land fragmentation. And Amboseli, as I've explained to you, the group branches have already been privatized and subdivided. Major roads are now crisscrossing through Amboseli, same with Laikipia, Tsavo, and the coast. Let's see, the standard gauge railway is another fight that we had fought, and that the standard gauge railway, of course, Kenya needed to upgrade its railway, but we had laws and provisions for that, protect environment and wildlife, largely ignored by the courts, ignored by the agencies. We lost on that. And they tore through the SGR, the standard gauge railway, right through Nairobi National Park, right through Tsavo, and the carnage that's been created by the standard gauge railway because of the fact that they failed to protect wildlife in their planning is profound. There are many talks on that. If you want any information, you want to really depress yourself.
No, I'm going to be less negative.
All right.
The activism that Joan and the Friends of Nairobi National Park and the Wildlife Foundation, different organizations did push the railway up.
Elevated.
They elevated the entire railway through the Nairobi National Park. So there is actually, it's an eyesore, it looks ugly, but there's no threat to the wildlife or to the habitat other than the posts that go into the ground to hold the railway up. As opposed to Tsavo, which is this is the railway connecting the coast to the inland, and it has to go through Tsavo like it had to go through Nairobi Park. In Tsavo, there was no active community like there was in Nairobi, and in Tsavo, it's mostly along the ground, and it blocks migratory routes. It's a real mess. You get a lot of animals being killed by the railway. It's quite different. So whatever you might say, you cannot stop a railway project, but you pushed it up, right?
Fair
enough.
And
it costs the government a lot more to push it up, so you see it as a win. Yeah, you got to balance things out.
We got to keep trying, and also through Tsavo, it's very sad to see the disorientation of the elephant migration, because they did have crossings for the wildlife, but the way they managed it is they're few and far between, and you've really disoriented the migratory routes for the elephants in particular, and they get trapped. It's quite a mess going up now Mombasa Highway.
But you don't have in Nairobi, right? Because it's elevated.
Well, you have a lot of different issues. Anyway, it's the fight. We're going to keep fighting. Next slide, please. Okay, Constitution of Kenya, and I just really want to read this lovely language of the Constitution of Kenya. Chapter 5, Land and Environment, Article 69, Obligations to respect the environment, obligations in respect of the environment, the state shall, in sustainable exploitation, utilization, management, and conservation of the environment and natural resources, and ensure the equitable sharing of the accruing benefits, protect genetic resources and biological diversity, to eliminate processes and activities that are likely to endanger the environment, enforcement of environmental rights. On application to clause 1, the court may make any order or directions it considers appropriate to stop, to prevent, stop, or can discontinue any act or omission that is harmful to the environment, to compel any public officer to take measures to prevent or discontinue act or omission that are harmful to the environment. I have only seen this inconsistently. I want to see this whole provision much stronger. And that's where we on the Wildlife Foundation. The Wildlife Foundation is an advocacy group. You got here a Korean American and this lovely man here truly behind us. Do look us up on the internet. You know, we really do our best to represent the communities on the ground, that they should understand and are aware of their rights as enshrined by the Constitution and the laws of Kenya. Gitanjali, I may not read it, but I offer to our readership, to our viewers, do take a look. We got loads of it, loads and loads of laws of Kenya to protect the environment and wildlife. Can we see more of it? Is there a next slide, please? 5, 2, 3. Implement. Okay. Okay, we're running out of time. Can we read it quickly? Next slide. I need questions. Next slide, please. Wildlife conservation shall be encouraged and recognized as a form of land use in public, community, and private land. Next slide, please. Do I need to sum up? All right. Should I read this? Should I read this? Resilient ecosystems. This is now excerpts from the National Wildlife Strategy 2030, a strategic plan required by the Wildlife Conservation Management Act. It's beautiful. Can I get the next slide, please? National, we can look this up by 5 to 3. And I do I need to sum up, Sanjay? Or can I sum up now? One more slide, please. One more slide. Can we? And then.
Well, there's great law.
Great law. Great law.
What you're talking about is the enforcement of something like that.
Okay. Yes. Implement. Okay. National. Okay, then we have one more slide. One more slide. Do we have any more slides? Oh, National Wildlife Strategy 2030, develop and implement innovative mitigation initiatives to address human wildlife conflict, implement management approaches that promote coexistence, including, I don't know, what's that word? Indigenous knowledge, implement alternative conservation programs to mitigate human wildlife conflict, develop sustainable national compensation scheme for loss of property and crops. I'd like to point out that it's the Wildlife Foundation since 2000 that has practiced all this law and have compelled its legislation. I would say we've been very proactive in developing this legislation. I would say that very fairly. Next slide, please. 2013, evidence-based decision-making, based in science. The science of the laws of Kenya is that the land of Kenya is fragile and must be developed carefully. And right now, the jury's out on it. Okay, next slide, please. The people. Okay, the point is sustainability. It's with the people. And what we've done on the Wildlife Foundation is that hopefully in a democracy, it's up to civil society to enshrine and to encode and to enforce its laws and to do it effectively. We get into court, we contact agencies, that's what we do. We have the center, we, do the kids thing, but the real work of the Wildlife Foundation is the laws of Kenyan wildlife and conservation.
There's an interesting sentence at the bottom. Kenya currently has 160 conservancies, 11% of the country's land mass. So these are the privately owned, private land. adjacent to national protected areas, and you're providing benefit to many households.
So the issue is payment for environmental services, economic services, and to bring the economy of Kenya in a balanced, efficient way. For sustainability, it's sustainability of natural resources through payment of environmental services.
So where we are today, because of COVID, everyone's having to rethink quite carefully how to fund these conservancies and the community benefits. Because they used to be tourism funded, and that with tourism numbers dropping off, we've had to start to think through what other sources of income and revenue can be generated to continue with the lease payments. At the end of the day, it's about benefits, and if you don't make the lease payments, people will sell their land. They need to pay school fees, they need to pay for healthcare, they need to pay for whatever they need to pay, and they do sell land. So when you have something coming to them, it's not large amounts. Then that they don't want to sell. So if they have some cash to take care of the basic needs, that's very effective in preventing them from selling. So COVID has presented a major challenge and a major rethink to a lot of the conservancies that are operating on how to keep the benefits flowing.
Next slide, please. Oh, we hit 3. Next slide, please. Oh, Veer Sikand Bush Baby Pigs. Now, our last session with on this platform, Rotary Wildlife Fellowship, we had that wonderful photographer. This is my nephew, Veer Sikand. Please look him up. He's 12 years old, and he is most certainly a professional photographer of East African Kenya wildlife. If you want to see what we got here in terms of wildlife assets, look up Veer Sikand at Bush Baby Pigs. Okay, thank you.
Or on YouTube.
Or on YouTube, he's there online, okay? So do look him up and you'll get some really stunning East African wildlife photography. Again,
From the eyes of a 12-year-old.
No, by any measure, by any benchmark, he's fantastic. Also, the issue to this wonderful audience. So we've got to come back to we've got to come back to our understanding of wildlife. We are not greater than wildlife. We are equal to wildlife. And what I'm really glad for on this platform is that we're looking at perhaps southern hemisphere wildlife and what remains. As my husband pointed out, there are a lot of similarities in the wildlife itself, but also in the communities and how communities in the southern hemisphere view wildlife. And we are equal to wildlife. We are not above wildlife. And it's really important that we come back to our traditional pre-modern attitudes of equality to wildlife, because we are one and the same. And I think that's really critical. I know my parents, when they were born in pre-war Korea, it was very indigenous. It was very, the water, we got the totem poles. I mean, you can go back and read about the American Indian, for example, and their indigenous lifestyles. There was a piece of legislature that was being discussed by the UN General Assembly called Rights of Mother Nature. And in this document, which did not get passed by the General Assembly of the UN, it did get encoded in certain jurisdictions, but it failed entirely because nobody could really grasp it too well, and it was not enforced as so much law is. But the issue is the rights of Mother Nature. We are living in one planet. You take a hand, you do not chop off one finger and expect it to work, So that's where we are now. One of the platforms I am on is the American Chamber, and they want to bring in Syngenta, and they want to bring in Monsanto, and they want to bring in all the big tech companies. And it's like, well, you got Joan Singh in there in the meetings screaming at them about wildlife. And the point about Kenya is that, and the Wildlife Foundation is that luckily we got into biodiversity conservation with living communities, living indigenous communities, coexistent with the land, equal with the land. And I really feel that is a critical way, a philosophy to address exactly where we're going to go. Because the only future for conservation today is for conservationists to is for the people and civil society to recognize we are equal with the land, we are equal with Mother Nature, and we need Mother Earth. We need our mother.
Are you saying
urgently.
you're just an animal? You're saying you're just an
We're
animal.
just an animal.
Yeah.
You're all
So-
equal.
so
It's a lion
I
with a
think,
giraffe. It's our friend. It's our neighbor.
I think one of the benefits of COVID has been is that it's brought out how close we are tied to nature, and that it's and not just COVID, but as we start to think about carbon and climate, that you really cannot think about climate and carbon without looking at biodiversity. The two go hand in hand. And if you don't protect your biodiversity, if you don't protect your habitat and everything that is living in that habitat, that keeps that habitat going, everything down from the bacteria, the viruses, the earthworms, up to the elephants and the lions and whatever else there may be, that whole ecosystem is so critical to keep the climate and the whole natural balance in place. So, as we go through these pandemics, it just shows that our immune systems have been destroyed. This modern Western lifestyle that we're all emulating, whether it's in India, whether it's in Africa, everyone, we're just blindly following this culture that is being thrown out of just consumption. And it's time to just step back and just say, hey, as Joan says, we're equal, but we're all part of the single ecosystem of the planet. And I think it's in everyone's benefit to keep it going for future generations as well as ourselves now. So thanks, and open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Sikand. It was a fantastic session, very informative as well. I request members to please use the option, raise hand option in the box so that, we can unmute the participant and he can go ahead and ask the question. Any questions? Yeah, what I suggest, Gitanjali, is I think probably you can unmute all. Maybe we'll have a couple of them asking questions. I'm not sure if they are able to.
Yeah, I have enabled that. Yeah.
Yes, Krishna, would you like to ask?
Maybe you mentioned this, but what is the cost of the lights for the lions?
What we do is we offer them, depending on to who, right? But we can offer them to communities anything from 20,000 shillings, $200.
We ask
$200.
Ed. We've got him. He's doing the line. He was struggling.
$200 is what we may offer them. $200, and the communities will typically pay a certain proportion of it. So there is some payment, co-payment by the local householder, because I don't believe in giving things for free. You've got to have some share, and then we'll pay 75% of the cost, and I'll pay 25% of the cost. Our own cost is much less than that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Krishna, Rotarian Krishna has a question to ask.
John, I don't know whether I've pronounced your name properly, but you spoke very passionately about the conservation. I must say both of you have so much of interest in this subject. I have one question to ask. What motivated you to get into the subject of wildlife? And the second question is, how do you inculcate this kind of passion to younger generation? These are two questions that I want to know.
My parents are from North Korea. I have seen my parents are from North Korea, which was a country that was 5,000 years old, and it was destroyed. And we're seeing destruction every day. So then I meet this guy in college, and we come to Kenya. And then, of course, Chairman Ed Loosely, who's amongst us today, we start this program. And I could see that we could try. I could see that we could repair. I could see that we could meet this challenge, and we could do something. And that's what we're doing, because I could see that we could get this far. And I don't know if we're succeeding, but you saw from the wildlife count, something is going on. We're doing something right. And let's continue.
No, but I think the question was, how do you inculcate it into your kids?
Yeah.
And so what we did, but both our kids, our son is very much driving our carbon project from the US, looking to work with satellite imagery to see how he can scale the whole, because the traditional methods of carbon where you use soil sampling is very time consuming, labor intensive, and it's not conducive to scaling. And our daughter is, as we speak, just shifting from an immigration lawyer job to a climate law job. So again, and in India, she was working for an NGO suing the Syngentas and people of this world who had dumped all these fertilizers into the Punjab area, and people were getting sick. So that passion has been into our kids, largely because of the passion of the mother, but also we gave them from a young age experiences with nature and let them see for themselves what it is like, what is nature, and what is clean water like, what is dirty water like, but give them those experiences.
As I mentioned, it was Friends of Nairobi National. So we come back, he finishes his graduate work in America, I finished my graduate work in America. So you come back to Kenya, and we've got the kids, they're very teeny tiny then, and we make them members of Friends of Nairobi National Park, What better way to have membership counts, because it is civil society. And so they're 2 and they're 3 and they're 4 and they're 5, and we count them as members. It was quite fun. And then they'd eat the cookies after.
Yeah, looks like both of you are very satisfied with your work. I only pray to God that both of you should get all your dreams come true. And
thank you so much. Let me tell you, there are so many challenges. Wherever you go, whichever we're talking Nairobi, you go to the coast, you go to the mountains. It in India is the same. All over India, the same challenges are there. Similar, in many ways.
When we went, just recently, the Ganges, the Himalayas, I know Imran Khan was opening the General Assembly last year. He was saying the Himalayas are all but gone, right? They're melting like hell. And of course, we've lost the snow-capped mountains. There are no more snow-capped mountains in Kenya. They're all gone, all finished. So, and again, my perspective. So, just briefly, if you want to hear the truth of it. So my parents are from North Korea, and Syria. And now South Korea is now the 9th largest economy in the world. So, you can turn things around. I've seen it in my lifetime. When you're doing the right thing, keep going.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. We have Sharavanan. He has raised his hand. Can you please ask, Sharavanan? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It was a very fantastic session. And I'm Sharavanan. I'm from Salem. I'm also working on wildlife, and it was very amazing to see about their challenges they are facing, and the kind of work they are doing is also very beautiful. I would like to ask about, as they were mentioning about the challenges that they are going to face regarding the developmental projects that are going to come around in the wildlife reserve areas and all these things. And Joan was also telling about a railway line that is planning to be put. Don't they have any kind of a guideline of raising infrastructure? Because it is going to be a linear intrusion into the wildlife area, and it is going to give a very big challenge for the wildlife. And is there any guidelines in your place to do all those kind of things so that they don't have any kind of harm to the wildlife in that area? I would like to ask about it.
There are guidelines.
You are muted. Wait. Are we on?
Yeah,
are we unmuted? Okay.
There are very strong guidelines. There's the environmental Management Act, the National. There are several acts that do provide the guidelines. The issue is enforcement. And what we find is when government wants to do a project, it'll often get the project going, and then all the paperwork will come later, just to make so they can say we've done everything. And it takes people on the ground who are alert and start making noise. And what we're seeing is many of the communities now are actually starting to take government to court to make sure that projects are done properly. We cannot stop development, and nobody wants to stop development. It's just got to be done in a way that is win-win where possible, as much as possible. So the railway, as we mentioned, has gone up. It went up very quickly in Savo before people knew what was going on, and there was no lobbying, and it was put along the ground mostly, with very few crossing points left. By the time it got to Nairobi, there was a lot of noise, and the government adjusted its plans to at least raise it. So you've got to be alert and just keep and across the country, especially during COVID, you would not believe how many infrastructural projects have been started and are going on during COVID when there's curfews and you cannot get out, you cannot gather, you cannot bring together public support. It's a difficult time, but I think it's happening all over the world. Governments are actually using this time to push through everywhere projects that are difficult, and they knew they would have a hard time to go through. I don't know about India, but it's certainly happening.
I'm sure in India. What may I mention that another hat of Davinder Sikand here is as honorary treasurer and 5-year board director to the East African Wildlife Society. East African Wildlife Society is one of the oldest conservation societies, institutions for East African conservation protection, which has the patrons of the presidents of Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. So let's see where we go. I mean, we got a lot to do.
Yeah, it is quite similar that it is the same kind of a situation that we face in India. Also, in most of the wildlife corridors, they have a lot of intrusions, national highways, railway lines, and reservoirs, and all these kind of things. They have really done a very big harm to the biodiversity, and the rate of elephants being killed by the railway lines and the other road kills that happen are too much, and we are unable to sensitize the people. But it is a very long fight, and most of the time it is a lost battle also, but still we cannot stop fighting it. But now we have a beautiful guidelines in India for all these kind of linear intrusions into wildlife area, and it has been designed by the Wildlife Institute of India. And now they have done a beautiful elevated highway on the national highway in Pench Tadoba corridor, and the other wildlife areas that are getting developed with these kind of intrusions. They're going to do this kind of an elevated highway only. But the only thing is, once when they commence the project and finalize it, it becomes too difficult for the government to do any kind of deviation or anything on that. But when it is done on the planning side itself, when they are doing a planning or something, we'll have to have a third eye to look into all those things, so what they will be thinking next, or what kind of infrastructure project is going to come, or how they are going to exploit this location for any other commercialization or anything. And only in that aspect we will be able to know about what aspect of planning will be there. So when it is on the planning side itself, when we are giving a proper representation, or if we enact the law or something, law of the land, so that I think there can be some better situations, I hope.
No, that's exactly right. And at East African Wildlife Society, what the CEO there does with her team is we encourage, as the board, we encourage them to make sure that they are with the various ministries at the planning level, and they have to get in at that stage. As you're right, as the plans are being developed, you go in there and sensitize them. This is the issue here, this is the issue here, and you try and resolve it at that point. Otherwise, as you say, once the plan has been done, it's very difficult to get it changed.
But I'd also like to point out that through the Wildlife Foundation, so I mentioned the Singh and the Jimmy Bora housing project, and that was between 2000 and 2006, and I was representing Friends of Nairobi National Park against the Jimmy Bora housing project, and we got finally dismissed. We were fighting that thing. We were volunteers and fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. You know, it was just, oh my goodness. And we lost in the end on a sheer technicality. So now, how do you get back into court? How do you have the locus standi? Sanjay, I believe you're a lawyer. Locus standi is the ability to pursue your rights under the Constitution, under your laws of the country. And the Wildlife Foundation does a pretty good job of dotting our T's, crossing our T's, dotting our I's. You know, where we have audited accounts. My husband is very good in finance. Every dime is accounted for, and we should be represented. And that's the issue with the Wildlife Foundation, is to make sure that Indigenous communities, they're only just now understanding the need to be educated, because they know that their lifestyle has always been right. Anyway, so now the Indigenous, now they know they can come to the Wildlife Foundation, we can represent their interests, and you get in there and you fight. I hope.
Thank you, Joan, Sikand, and it was a fantastic work that you're doing. I'm happy about your work, and good luck to all your endeavors also. And I think the sensitization of the local public and the people who are actually on that landscape will be the best thing to stand upon for protecting that thing. And I think you're doing it good. Thank you for your
absolutely, Mr. Saravanan, you're right. I think it's people in that particular landscape know better, you know, and their involvement is very important. So we have next, we have Donan, Rotarian Donan from RC Kampala. Yes, Donan, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much, moderator, and to the hosts. We appreciate very much all the work that you've been doing for the wildlife in Kenya, and for your presentation as well. It was quite a lovely presentation, and I was impressed by the work that you've done over the years. Thank you very much once again. My questions were similar to the previous person about legislation and policy. You have your policies within the wildlife conservation, and then government also has done its part, like you said, especially during the COVID time when they took advantage of creating infrastructure right through conservation areas. Some of those things may not be able to be stopped, but for continuation, what plans or how do you suggest should such issues be mitigated? Back here in Uganda, I'm from Uganda, back here in Uganda, in one of the conservation areas, the biggest actually, Murchison Falls National Park, a road has been built through it for oil exploration conveniences. And even a bridge has been built across the River Nile where there was a ferry. All those are going to create scarings for the animals, and they'll move further deeper into the national park, which will become a challenge for people to go to see these animals. Previously, it was quite easy to get near them, but now with the road, the animals move further away from the road, as it will definitely bring lots of traffic. That road has cut a greater distance and made a shortcut to the northwestern part of the country. So my question is, how do we mitigate such issues when you know that government has its policies which are for their interests, which are in their interests, but we as conservationists also have our own interests and would like to protect the animals. But at times government policies override the policies of the conservationists. Thank you.
Difficult, Donan, as you have mentioned, when governments have their agenda, and you almost have to follow along. And as what one previous participant mentioned, that it's really important to get with the governments at the planning stage as best you can. So the East African Wildlife Society, which Joan mentioned, I'm on the board of, we have recently, last year, reopened our office in Kampala. And we have a small office there, and we have Captain Otikat, who's our Ugandan board member. And my suggestion would be is I can connect you, if you don't know East African Wildlife Society in Kampala and Captain Otikat, have a meet him, chat with him, because these are all very pertinent issues. And to the extent that an organized conservation body network can come to life in Kampala, at least you can have influence on the government officials to whatever degree you can. I know that Captain has the ear of many of the senior government people, so at least when issues are raised, he voices them. I know that we have, as the East African Wildlife Society, stopped a couple of projects in Uganda. There was something in one of the forests recently that was put on hold because of the lobbying we did. There was also there's a couple of things that have been stopped, and so you can, but it's lobbying and working in a coordinated fashion. So Donna, and afterwards, if you want, I'll connect you via email to Catherine.
And let's also remark about the disastrous dam that was supposed to be built in Salou, which has now been stopped, which is fantastic. I don't know if East African Wildlife Society was part of that. No?
No, we won't talk about it. Yeah.
But anyway, so far it looks like the dam, which was already 50% built, has been stopped before completion. So let's watch that.
Yeah. Thank you, Don.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donan. There's one more hand raised. The name is not written. It says Flogging Kenya. Would you like to ask? Yeah.
So much. This discussion has been one of the best, learning from people.
Could you please disclose your name, sir?
Okay, I'm Zablon by name. I'm the founder of Plugging Kenya. So basically, it's a youth registered local NGO back in Kenya. We are more focused on cleanups. Yeah, so I'm quite happy to be part and parcel of this discussion. I'm also a member of Friends of Nairobi National Park. I think I've met a couple of times Mr. Davinder and the wife in a couple of forums. My biggest concern is on waste, which is the fresh effluents which are getting their way into Nairobi National Park. I just wanted to know what's their view, what's their sentiment, and what can we do as both the organization and other interested organizations to ensure that this vice, which is coming in slowly, we can curb it before it becomes a big menace to our wildlife. Thank you so much.
Hi, Zablon, hi. It's been a while since we chatted, and since we last spoke as the Wildlife Foundation, we've done a number of litter pickups, and I think last year we did, I don't know how many tons of waste. A lot of plastic was collected from along the river, the Mbagathi River, by youth. Primarily youth to come out, and then with our rangers go out and collect. We've started separating the garbage, so the plastics, everything separated. What is organic waste goes back to compost. The plastics go for recycling. There's a little bit of metal, and then we did a water test on the river around where the center is. So it's when it gets to the center, the river has already gone through almost half of the park, more than half of the park along the side. But still, the river was nasty, and what's coming out from Rongai and the farms north of Karen is pretty horrific. So and KWS seems oblivious to making any action there. So by all means, I think Zablon, let's coordinate and think through what is the best way to see how we can enforce the cleanup of that water.
But the issue is that you do have the National Environment Management Authority. Now, do they act? I don't know. Maybe they're doing things, but to the best of my knowledge, they're not doing what they can do. They really do have wide authority to engage in the environment. Why they don't do so, I don't know. Do we have to sue the National Environment Management Authority? Maybe that's one strategy.
I don't know. Let's think.
Let's
connect again. We'll reach out and think this through. I think if the people also start making noise, because a lot of people, everyone uses the water for livestock. Some people still use the river for tea and things like that. So it's not fit for human consumption.
It's ghastly
right now.
And let's remark. Thank you for being a member of Friends of Nairobi National Park. Friends of Nairobi National Park begins in 1995. It is a completely volunteer organization, and I would like to commend the association for fighting this fight to protect Nairobi National Park for 20 years. Very good. Davinder was the inaugural treasurer, and as you know, my kids were the first members back then.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll just allow one last question. Krishna, you wanted to ask one more question. Krishna Grania. It's not. There are many Krishnas here, including me. So this was from Krishna Grania. You wanted to ask one more question. I saw your hand raised. Krishna.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Krishna. Please go ahead.
Okay, it was actually related to the salvo. I wanted to help out somehow, and I wanted to know how to do that. If there's anything, you can let me know later on. You have my contact.
Sure, Krishna, I will connect you to Joan. She's also a member of our fellowship. I will connect both of you. Yeah. Ed, you want to say something? Thank you, Krishna. Thanks for joining. You are our newest member, and thanks for joining. Yeah, Ed, you want to say something? Ed Loosely is here. Yeah.
Can you hear me? I would like to thank Davinder, Joan, Sikand so much. We call them the dynamic duo, and they're responsible for a lot of good things happening in Kenya. And we want to invite the good people of India to come visit us in Kenya and share the wonderful experiences you can have here. You're welcome, most welcome.
Thank you so much, Ed. You have expressed and extended your invitation even before, I thought I will ask you if we could all plan a trip from our fellowship group from India to visit the Wildlife Foundation and spend a few days there and then go around. Quite a few of us have visited Kenya in the past, and we would definitely love to visit Kenya again. Yeah, thank you. I think we have had a wonderful session. I will just formally render a vote of thanks, and then we can close this session.